In our last video, we talked about risk management across those that are in their 30s and 40s. Well, today we're going to talk about those of you who are in your 50s and 60s. What does it look like if you're aggressive in this age bracket? What does it look like if you're conservative and somewhere in between? We'll hit all of those and then ask Ryan what conversations he's having with clients in this range and how it shifts depending on where somebody is along that aggressive or not spectrum. Should be a lot of fun. We're going to dive right in coming up next. Walter Storholt back with you alongside Ryan Fleming, the pilot's advisor. And Ryan, we're talking risk management and aggressive, conservative, what that looks like again on today's episode. But we've bumped up the ages a little bit. So now we're talking to pilots who are in their 50s and 60s. We're talking to pre-retirees at this point. So talk to us a little bit about what an aggressive person looks like in this age bracket, what a conservative or cautious pilot might look like, and then those that are finding their balance in between. And I know that we're going to discover it might look or sound a little bit different than those who are in their 30s and 40s.
Yeah, I think people in their 50s are still very much in the accumulation phase. They still have a long enough time horizon that we really shouldn't be having too much conversations about pulling the throttles back, unless they're trying to retire early. Most pilots go to 60 or 65. But this is where education really starts to step up, and we have conversations because most people think they need to be more conservative as they get closer to retirement or their age. I'm getting into my 60s. I need to pull the throttles back and be more conservative. But it's really not the case because it has nothing to do with your age, and it has everything to do with your time horizon for that money. And the way I like to talk about this is, and I'll differentiate this between like a FedEx and UPS pilot versus like a Delta or United pilot. Delta and United, they lost their pension many, many years ago, where FedEx and UPS still have a pension. So as we lead or get closer to retirement, the conversation is very, very different. For most FedEx pilots, they have a pretty sizable pension. They may even have a military pension. So how much income they need off of their 401k in retirement might not be a huge amount. And because of that, maybe 80 to 90% of their 401k, they may never touch, or it's going to continue to grow. The time horizon for that money is very, very far off. So we can actually put protections in place where we can keep the throttles up on that money and try to get that long-term growth. Well, if you're a Delta pilot or United pilot and you don't have any other pensions, and from day one, you need to get all your income from that 401k plan and your savings, minus Social Security and everything like that, it's a different conversation because you can't handle that volatility. We got to think about sequence of returns, risk, and retirement, because we don't want to be pulling from that portfolio if it's down 15, 20% in this first couple of years. That could blow up your retirement picture. So this is where it really, really depends on a person's situation, and understanding those different pots of money is going to dictate probably where you should fall within this risk tolerance and why, and have a reason why in that system. Does that make sense, Walter?
Yeah, I think so. And that's why you get some people who are more aggressive, wanting to push down the controls a little bit, and those who want to peel back and be more conservative. And maybe they want to move away from stocks. The old advice, right, of move away from stocks and into bonds. They might be following outdated advice if they're not informed, or if they're just kind of going off of what maybe a previous person in their family, how they handled this transition. And it also sounds like you're identifying, hey, 50s and 60s, we're lumping these together in the purpose of this conversation, but there may be a big difference between 50s and 60s. Like there's a transition point at some point where we've got to start thinking differently, but a lot of people aren't very good at identifying when that transition happens.
Yeah, and I think it would be a healthy conversation to split the 50s from the 60s, because it is a very, very different situation between accumulation and then, hey, retirement. I see it coming around the corner. The other thing I see a lot of is people that are in their 60s or 70s, and they've become extremely conservative with their money. And I ask them, are you ever going to touch this money? You're basically living off your pension. And I see this a lot, actually. And they're like, well, no, we're very comfortable with our pension, and we I'm sure we'll pass that money on to our kids. Well, if that's the case, you should push the throttles all the way back up on that money and let it grow, let it work. And then you could pass on that much more. For you being conservative with money that you're never going to touch, it doesn't make that much sense at all from a legacy planning standpoint. And I see this a lot. So if you truly want to pass on money for legacy, then you probably want to look at it not from the perspective of you touching it, but what can you actually pass on to your kids where their time horizon is that much farther down the road.
Yeah, all great points. I guess you've got people that are in the middle too, where they start thinking about diversifying away from both stocks and bonds. Is that something you typically view as like an important part of that role, or is that almost a mistake to start looking away from the core and the basics?
I think that's definitely the core and the basics from a diversification standpoint. Where I see stuff outside of stocks and bonds, it's a lot of real estate, owning houses or a rental house, or trying to produce cash flow from something like that, like a hard asset. But the thing that I would say is even somebody in retirement still has, most people go to that 60-40 model that we all talk about, where 60% of their money is still exposed to equities. And why? They have to have that long-term growth to outpace inflation. So we have 40% of the portfolio that's in fixed income or bonds, which is going to reduce our volatility because they can't handle the volatility. So that 60-40, but that 60% in equities is helping us to outpace inflation. So we're not just losing value and not getting any market returns during those retirement years. So you got to have a little bit of the yin to the yang to have a successful retirement.
Yeah, very great, very well said. Anything else you'd like to say to folks that are in that age bracket and thinking about risk and what's the right amount for them and how they can kind of nail this down, this big conversation down in their retirement plans?
We've had this conversation at a lot of advisor conferences, and it's funny because a lot of people have come out that the mistakes that people make are not being aggressive enough through more of their years because we have to take into account taxes and inflation. And you have to get a lot more money than you realize. And I say this all the time. I don't think people truly realize how much they have to have saved to continue the current lifestyle they have. $1 million is only going to spit out about 40 or 50 grand a year over the course of a 25, 30-year retirement using a safe withdrawal rate. And I think that number is very alarming for most people.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Kind of as a final lesson today, maybe rethinking the old school line of thought process of let me get more and more conservative in retirement, not to completely go the other direction and say become Evel Knievel in the way that you approach your portfolio, but let's recalibrate that we might need to stay more aggressive in some areas than the typical line of thinking would have been for many years.
Yeah, and maybe for a future podcast, once again, it's more about your time horizon and not your age. And then also when we look at retirement income planning, we build out a bucket strategy for that exact reason. Let's invest this money for a 1 to 3 year time horizon. This bucket's for 3 to 5 years, and then this bucket's for 5 to 20 years. And all of those are going to have different risk tolerances and different asset allocations for the time horizon when that money's needed.
Yeah, all good points. Well, if you've got questions about the appropriate risk and how to manage that for your portfolio and your situation in life right now, especially if you're a pilot listening and watching today's episode, reach out to Ryan, have a conversation about where you are right now, where you're trying to get, and how to appropriately build a plan to accomplish your financial goals. The best starting point is to click the link in the description of today's show or go to retirepilots.com and order the toolkit. This is a toolkit, that physical box that Ryan's put together. It's packed with his book, helpful guides, and more information about planning for retirement. It also qualifies you for a free portfolio analysis. That's the one-on-one visit with Ryan where you can have a conversation about your specific plan and start building toward your financial future. So check that out. Again, link in the description of today's show. Ryan, thank you so much for the help, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Appreciate you, Walter. Have a good one.
You too. That's Ryan. I'm Walter. We'll see you next time, right back here on The Pilot's Advisor.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.